more and more is coming forward as we learn about what the FBI was doing to try to understand how to undermine and take out the MAGA movement. And they were doing it all in the name of J6. Right, so more information, as I said, has been coming forward about this Arctic frost. We've been talking about it here. You know about the FBI memo that was just revealed. Dan Bongino had to tell these senators last week, hey, guess what? They were gathering information on your phone records. They were gathering metadata. It's known as tolling, where you figure out exactly who one person is talking to, and then you collect records on the other person that they're talking to, and you figure out exactly where they are geographically, how long they've been talking. You're not actually getting the conversation itself, but you're getting the metadata. Again, this is known as tolling. Now, the left is trying to downplay this story. I'm saying it's bigger than Watergate, and I'm not kidding here, because wait till you hear about some of the stuff that was going on and how it went down. They are trying to say that this is not what you think, because Josh Hawley referred to it as wiretapping. And there's a technicality in terms of the difference in the wording, right? Tolling is one thing, wiretapping is another. In this case, they were just gathering the metadata because apparently, as John Solomon so aptly put it, they were really trying to kind of map out who the players were and how could they undermine them going into the 2024 election. I bring this up and say it this way because I think about what went down, right? You had the Capitol riot in what? January was J6 of 2021. That was sort of the impetus for all of this, right? You had Nancy Pelosi's daughter, Alexandra, there with her little camera recorder, taping the whole thing, putting music to it. I mean, she's a documentary filmmaker, right? And of course, instead of actually inviting any journalists inside, they had Alexandra Pelosi's daughter, who then, I guess, was selling the footage to HBO, who then sold it to CNN. I mean, she probably made a pretty penny on it too. So you have all of this going on in January of 2021. But what's weird to me, this is what's weird to me, is that the first person to actually start going out and getting all of this metadata, that was Timothy Thibault. Jack Smith eventually used it, but this guy, I want you to see him here. Timothy Thibault started this so-called Arctic frost case. Timothy Thibault was an FBI agent who was working in the Washington office. He had actually been the guy who was investigating Hunter Biden's laptop. Oh, that was another example of misinformation. Yeah, Hunter Biden's laptop was not real, was not the subject of an FBI investigation. In fact, they even came up with the bright idea to have 51X spooks and spies and CIA agents, you name it, a whole bunch of hacks, right, that signed off on that thing, knowing that it was real and that this guy, Timothy Thibault, was in charge of the investigation. They pretended like that investigation wasn't happening. So Timothy Thibault decides in February to April, around that time, so let's call it spring of 2022, to go out and start this, quote, Arctic frost case. And in this Arctic frost case, they decide to name President Trump as somebody who's of criminal suspicion. So they opened this case, and what's fascinating about this is they broke all the rules when they opened this case, and this is the case that enabled them to go out there and start collecting this data. You see, they opened the case themselves. Timothy Thibault, if we look at metadata per the Word document, which shows you who was in it last and who initiated it first, Chuck Grassley, thanks to his office, they've found all this information out, thanks to whistleblowers who have been coming forward, both to Dan and to Cash, and of course to Grassley, who's investigating this. Well, this metadata shows that Timothy Thibault, who you just saw, he was the guy who authored it, and then he was the guy that approved the opening of the case, and he was the guy that approved the gathering of the metadata, which you can't actually do because there's this little thing called self-approval rule. I want to put this up for you. It's actually something in the FBI's code, section 3523 of the FBI's Domestic Investigations and Operations Guide, DIOG, is the no self-approval rule. In other words, if you're the one that's like initiating something like this, like a criminal investigation into a former president of the United States, you can't actually be the one to sign off on it. You can't be the one to be the final okay on it. And yet he was. So that's a little weird in and of itself. So then, you fast forward, and they've got this J6 committee, and they're gathering all this data, and we don't know, did they have any proper justification for this? Did they get the warrants? Did they get a FISA warrant? Did they get a Patriot Act letter? Like, what did they do? Was there a subpoena? That's not really clear. We just know that they decided to open this and they had the ball and they just kept running with it. And that leaves us saying, well, what exactly was the goal? Why did you need to have all this data? By the way, the investigation eventually kind of went kaput, right? The J6 committee was dissolved after Americans came forward and put the Republicans in charge of the House, but they still had all that metadata. And then they decided to do something more with it. Let's go to John again, talking about how they were mapping an enemies list.
That plot gets stopped by the American people in December 2022 because Americans choose Republicans, Republicans come in, the Democrats get thrown out of the House. A year later, when Adam Kinzinger is no longer a member of the committee, he's no longer a member of the House. He no longer has protection of the speech and debate clause. He's calling up the FBI and trying to give them these records, which, by the way, the FBI would never have been able to get this large a swath of records. It's just too broad a request, right? There wouldn't be a legitimate investigative need for that many records. He's trying to say, hey, I don't know, but let's just get them to you guys. He's making that call in December of 2023, 4 years after most of the cases have already been brought in January 6th. Why is he doing that? He's not doing it for some legislative purpose. He's not doing it for some criminal purpose, because J6 is mostly solved by that point. He's doing it to try to give the FBI one more piece of weaponry to stop Donald Trump from winning the presidency in 24. That's what is so concerning. It's a civil liberties violation that then gets politically weaponized by offering it to the FBI.
Wow. Okay? Like, wow. So they took all this information. And Kinzinger, by the way, you know, at a certain point, again, if you think about the dates, I mean, the investigation had wound down. It's late 2023. They know Donald Trump's going to run for office. And so then Kinzinger allegedly takes this information back to the FBI and says, hey, here you go. Because again, they're trying to figure out who is the problem, who is the enemy.
The committee gets up and running in 2022. Yep. They go out and get this massive dragnet of phone records, 30 million. You don't need 30 million phone calls to figure out what was going on January 6th. What were they doing? They were mapping the MAGA movement with every piece of data they could. It was basically creating an enemies list. That's what the J6 committee was doing in this project. And think about the scope and scale of what they've now done. 30 million lines of phone records trying to figure out everybody who talked to the Trump White House. 92 groups, including Charlie Kirk's TPUSA and everybody else in the conservative movement. 8 members of Congress in the Senate, 1 member of the Congress in the House. They were mapping an enemies list. This was an investigation purportedly to solve what happened at the Capitol that instead was trying to figure out who are the movers and shakers in the MAGA movement that we can stop in 2024.
Right? I mean, that's exactly what was going down. They wanted to stop big organizations like Turning Point USA. That was one of the organizations that was being investigated. They were collecting toll data on, metadata on. I mean, remember the Edward Snowden fiasco, right? That was because he exposed the metadata gathering. You can't do this, okay? You can't do it. You need a warrant for it, for goodness sakes. And yet they were doing all of this. And I'd like to know under what justification they didn't have any. Again, going back to Thibault. You can't, Timothy Thibault, decide to open an investigation and then be the one who okays everything on the investigation. Where was the oversight? They get the J6 committee together and they're chomping at the bit. Okay, this is our time. This is our moment. We're going to get all this information. We're going to make sure that we destroy Donald Trump and anybody associated with him. Half the country, frankly, because half the country voted for him. We're going to destroy him for good. Because, if you're going to mass in Latin, you must be a problem. Yeah. That was actually a thing. People that were going to mass in Latin. If you were at a school board meeting and trying to defend your kid because you said, I don't think that this whole trans thing is really appropriate for discussion in school. I don't think it's right that my kid has to race against somebody who's a naturally born male, a female racing against a male. Well, then you were the problem. You were under investigation. So think about this. They were trying to destroy an entire school of thought, an entire half of the country, 30 million phone records that they were assembling. And then, as John said, when America said, you know what, we don't really want you anymore, and the Congress switched back to Republican control, Adam Kinzinger went away hat in hand, and he kept the phone records. And now he is the guy who reportedly brought them back to the FBI. In the meantime, Thibault resigned because Republicans were like, oh, buddy, who are you? I mean, for goodness sakes, you couldn't get the Hunter Biden laptop right to save your life, right? You're clearly corrupt. That was their view on him. And so under all of that pressure, he goes away, but they still have that data. They still have the phone records. And so this is really bizarre. So remember when Dan said the other day on Fox and Friends, he was like, there's this secret room. And in this secret room, like, we're getting all this information because you see all of this stuff got sealed, it got archived, and it theoretically went away until some of these whistleblowers came in, and the whistleblowers offered it up. And what do you know? We find this whole Arctic frost disaster. And there's something called the Cellular Analysis Survey Team that they were using to gather, again, this preliminary toll analysis. What I find fascinating is that they didn't do that right after January 6th. Like, wouldn't they have done that immediately following the J6 investigation? Like, why are you waiting until September of 2023, more than 2 years after J6? 18 months after the Arctic frost case was first opened to start going after all of this toll data, to start tapping. Oh, I can't say tapping. Tolling, thank you very much. The phones of 8 U.S. senators and a sitting congressman. Why? Oh, I see. Because Donald Trump was going to run and they needed to stop Trump. I mean, it's just unbelievable. Right? It's unbelievable when you think about the journalists involved. I mean, we were just talking about ABC and how Georgie Poo is so miserable at ABC because, you know, he can't believe they had to pay $16 million because he libeled the president on live television. He can't ask J.D. Vance a normal question and gets a little mad and perturbed and cuts to commercial break when, you know, J.D. throws it back in his face. Look, I mean, they had their bias in the media, and the bias was all over whatever they were doing in the so-called deep state, and it ran wild. But you know what? This goes back in time, guys, to Obama, right? Think about that. We've known about Obama thanks to Tulsi Gabbard. I mean, Tulsi Gabbard, who, by the way, they were trying to say was a Russian spy because, you see, she was a threat to Hillary Clinton. She used to be a Democrat, and Hillary was like, gosh, this woman's got some pizzazz. She's a little better on stage than I am. How are we going to take her down? Well, we'll just call her a Russian spy. It was like their go-to move. You're a Russian spy, you know, Russia, Russia, Russia. So what Tulsi has now uncovered is that the Obama administration actually orchestrated a very deliberate attempt to actually hurt and harm the presidency of Donald J. Trump when he came into office after winning in 2016. Think of how insane that is. Now we know that 20 whistleblowers have come forward to say, yes, Tulsi, Dan, Cash, you guys are right. Watch.
Of National Intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, releasing a bombshell report today that shows a conspiracy by a sitting president, Barack Obama, and his intel agencies to sabotage the president-elect, Donald Trump, brainwash the electorate, and undermine the legitimacy of an election.
There is irrefutable evidence that detail how President Obama and his national security team directed the creation of an intelligence community assessment that they knew was false. They knew it would promote this contrived narrative that Russia interfered in the 2016 election to help President Trump win, selling it to the American people as though it were true. It wasn't.
Gabbard got her hands on a House intel report that's been locked away in a CIA vault for almost a decade. Investigators spent over 2,000 hours looking into how the Russia hoax was born, interviewing 20 CIA and FBI officials. And it turns out that the Obama administration doctored the intelligence to make it look like Putin and Trump stole the election.
Yeah.
A month after Trump beat...
I mean, we knew that. We suspected that, right? But now it's all being confirmed. So it's alarming. And what's concerning is how they kept it going. not just through what was going on via Deep State and Comey, et cetera. And he's going to pay a price for it. I mean, so is Brennan. Brennan's like freaking out. We showed him on MSNBC. Remember that clip yesterday I showed you guys? And he's like, I didn't do anything wrong. I thought all about it. I didn't do anything wrong. Yeah. You keep telling yourself that. I mean, I think a lot of people are going to have to pay a price for this. And I'm not a vindictive person. I actually don't like this. I wish we weren't living in a tit for tat kind of environment. But there's something to be said, right, for the real politics school of thought of mutual assured destruction. In other words, you guys play that game, we're going to come back at you. We're not going to roll over and play dead. We're not going to be Mr. Nice Guy. Donald Trump was Mr. Nice Guy for 4 years, and look at what they did. And then he wasn't even there, and they still kept doing it. And as soon as he said he was going to announce that he was running for office, well, they just came back at it again and again and again. I mean, his own family members, we've been told, couldn't get bank accounts, which, by the way, brings me to a partnership I wanted to just quickly mention because this was a big freaking deal. I mean, I told you, I got so many calls from my bank. I was like, when did I suddenly get so popular? I've had this bank account for 20 years. I have a few different bank accounts, but there was one in particular, and it will remain nameless. But I will tell you, I couldn't believe how often I started hearing from them, but that was what was going on, right? During the Biden administration, during the Obama administration, regulators pressured these banks to close accounts, literally close accounts that they thought were from individuals. Oh, I don't know, that they were mapping in the 30 million phone records that they had acquired. Think about that, you guys, how bad this was. If you're mapping the MAGA movement and then you're like, okay, we're going to take out this one and this one and this one and this one. And then you're going to Bank of America and you're saying, please hand over all of the records of these people or debank them because they don't have a right to a bank account. Guess what? People's freedoms were trampled on. Civil liberties were trampled on. This is a big story and a big deal. But I just want to give a shout out for Americans for Free Markets because they, along with myself, are applauding what President Trump has done in terms of ensuring that everyday Americans have access to a bank, and they're standing up for freedom and for the opportunity to prosper. They are urging Congress right now to follow Donald Trump's lead. We want to establish effectively a national fair access movement so that, you know what, regardless of your political, your social, your religious status, you get to have a bank account. We need clarity. We need consistency. We need long overdue accountability when it comes to financial regulation. So to protect the financial freedom of every American, Congress is going to build upon what President Trump is doing and build upon his leadership. You got to update these outdated laws so the Adam Kinsingers and the Liz Cheneys and the Elizabeth Warrens of the world can't actually try and shut half the country down anymore. It's called Americans for Free Markets. Go to forfreemarkets.com to learn more. Again, for free markets to learn more. I'll tell you though, we got a situation, as they say, on our hands. A little bit of good news. We just came out with our quarterly reports over at 76 Research, and not bad, actually monthly report, I should say. So total return by sector, check it out, American Resilience. We get tech picks up 67, we get material picks up 85%, we get financials up 50%. I really encourage you guys to go over to 76 Research. It is my company. I started in part to just rebel against the ESG DEI movement in the financial services industry. I was like, this is crazy. You can't even get any like honest research, let alone honest reporting, right? Like on the news, you couldn't get any honest research on Wall Street. So I started this with a dear friend who has spent a couple of decades running a mutual fund, brilliant stock picker. And well, the proof is in the pudding. Just take a look at that. So go over to 76research.com for the first 2 months. It's $1 with my code DOLLAR, and you can get our research.